Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this episode, Betty Gilpin is fighting for her life in Blumhouse's The Hunt. A group of people with right-wing political views, amongst them Betty Gilpin's Crystal, Ike Barinholtz's Staten Island, Emma Roberts' Yoga Pants, Wayne Duvall's Don, and Ethan Suplee's Gary wake up in a clearing after being drugged. They soon realise that they're being hunted and must now try and figure out why and where they're being chased, and Crystal is not going to be simply easy prey. The Hunt, not to be confused with the Mads Mikkelsen movie the same name, is already Blumhouse's third release this year, but as you probably already know, it wasn't meant to be this way. The film was meant to be released last September, but was shelved out of sensitivity, but not before a number of commentators, including President Trump himself, attacked and criticised the film sight unseen for its supposedly exploitative content and premise. Universal let the heat die down a little bit and sat on the film, and now 6 months later, it re-emerges with a brand new marketing campaign that takes advantage of all that controversy and uses those sensationalistic quotes about it and plasters it all over the poster, rather amusingly using it as a way of just selling the film. But is it worthy of all this attention? No, not really. It's essentially just another variation of The Most Dangerous Game, and you've seen a number of films like that, from Predator to Surviving the Game to The Condemned. There really isn't that much new here, and it's essentially combining that premise with elements of The Purge, if it was also the antithesis of the Purge series politics. The delay has actually worked out in other ways for the film because co-writer Damon Lindelof is now hot off the success of HBO's Watchmen, as opposed to being the guy that co-wrote Prometheus, and the film is directed by Craig Sobel, who previously helmed Z for Zachariah. The question is though, does it really live up to the tagline of being the most controversial movie of the year? And the answer is, of course it doesn't. If anything, the controversy is exactly what a movie like The Hunt wants, given it's trying to push as many buttons as possible. And make no mistake, this is a movie that thinks it's far smarter than it really is. And you can see this in the way the opening act is written. The film begins by introducing us to this whole group of characters very quickly, and then almost immediately just beginning the action. And there's chaos, there's panic and disorientation as characters scramble to escape, and it's certainly a very efficient way of beginning the film, and to a certain extent, the audience is allied with the characters amidst all this confusion, but only to an extent. The first most immediate misstep is that directly before this, there have been several scenes in a prologue that very heavily hint at what has happened to these characters and why, so already we're ahead of them, and then the script on top of that feels the need to constantly assert just how clever it is by trying to outwit the audience and try to do shocking and surprising things. Now, there's nothing wrong with a movie trying to be unexpected. In fact, that's the sign of a good movie, of doing something that you didn't necessarily know it was going to do. The problem is The Hunt does that at least several times in the first 30 minutes. Essentially, it's just a series of red herrings, in that we have several characters that seem to be protagonists, the way it focuses upon them. Oh, you think this character's going to be leading the movie? Too bad, they're dead. What about this person? Oh, maybe that's a mistake as well. I presume this is meant to be teaching the audience to expect the unexpected and don't trust things at first glance, but all it really ends up doing is that we have no attachment to what's going on screen. Why should we invest in any of these characters when, for all we know, they're going to abruptly die in the next scene and it's just going to move on to someone else? It's a tiresome trick that is abused by its overuse. Once would have been fine, not several times in the first half hour, and the movie never really gets out of this. It almost feels like every scene or sequence has to end on some kind of twist or revelation that changes the variables of what's going on, but at least later on it feels like some form of coherent story, whereas the opening is just setting up various plot strands that it has no interest in following up on. In fact, the protagonist of the movie barely even features until a good half hour into it. So this entire opening act of the film is just messing around with the audience, and it's completely pointless. It feels like total, utter time-wasting and makes the film feel incredibly empty right from the outset. A movie that wastes half an hour of its running time, a third of its length, on just simply pranking the audience is not doing its job properly. Of course, you soon realise they're not actually supposed to care about any of these characters because they're meant to be unlikable, one-dimensional caricatures, and that's precisely what they are. I think you can tell how much investment the film wants you to have in them by the fact that most of them don't even have names. They're simply credited dismissive titles like Staten Island or Yoga Pants. They're meant to be recognisable types that we're wanting to see get gruesomely maimed and killed. That's their entire purpose. And that causes some major problems. The first is that a movie like this needs characters that we can at least root for or at least follow, and the movie deliberately doesn't provide that at first. And secondly, it whittles through them so quickly. Even though there are 12 characters being hunted, most of them get pretty much dashed in the opening stretch of the film, and as such, it gives it absolutely nowhere to go. The movie slows down dramatically in the second act because there isn't really that many characters left by that point, and then it doesn't really know what to do. At least keeping some of the characters around a little bit longer would have changed up the dynamic, or at least given us some various points of view, but instead, the movie just loses a lot of its momentum because it's simply going for lots of cheap kill shots right out of the gate. Although naturally you're not supposed to be rooting for the hunters either. The movie pretty much directs its ire at everyone in its general vicinity. The villains of the movie are wealthy left-wingers, which I guess is its one novelty, because often the villains in these kind of movies are wealthy right-wingers. But whichever characters you spend time with, they're bound to be obnoxious. You've got the hunted calling each other cucks and snowflakes, or the hunters constantly calling each other out for being racist or appropriating, which is hilarious because they're hunting humans. Isn't that hypocritical? Their politics are performative. We're taking that one note of commentary and hammering it into the ground. If you didn't think it was funny once, you'll sure think it's hilarious by the 25th time the movie does it. And as such, it's made up of characters that are extremely unpleasant to be around, and the dialogue seems like it's just reciting a comment section out loud. The only character the audience is in any way invited to engage with is Betty Gilpin's Crystal, and that's because she's a blank slate that can be viewed from whatever perspective you're watching this movie from. She arrives in this film as pretty much fully formed, badass, deep-fried action girl. The only real surprise here is that she comes from Mississippi as opposed from Texas, and that's the entirety of her characterization. And I hate to tell you this, but Action Girl is not a character by itself. You need to give her some kind of personality surrounding that, otherwise it's just a trope walking. An action girl character that comes in beating people's heads in and smoking cigarettes, that's not a strong character, it's just a type, and a deep cliche at that. But the movie purposely and deliberately avoids giving her any kind of real personality because she's meant to be vague and ambiguous, because we don't even know if she is actually right-wing or not. There's always a question mark hanging over this character, which means the movie gets to have its cake and eat it. Essentially, the character is functionally neutral. They even mention this at one point because a character asks her why they're being hunted, and she very eloquently puts it as, "I don't give a shit, I just know that I am," and pretty much disregards the political commentary that's going on here. The character is a microcosm of the movie's politics, which is pretty much whatever you want to read them to be. I don't care. It's cowardly, both sides nonsense, and God forbid we actually commit to making any decision about this character lest the audience dislike her for it. if the character works, it's only because of Betty Gilpin's performance, who is working overtime with this incredibly underwritten part and trying to give her some actual kind of attitude or quirk or just genuine personality to it. Gilpin definitely shines in a couple of moments, especially when she gets a long monologue where she has to do this twisted retelling of the tortoise and the hare, but there's only so much she can do when she's literally just as one-dimensional as the caricatures that exist solely to be picked off. I'm just going to give a very mild spoiler warning here. If you've seen any of the advertising for this film, you already know this, but if you haven't, the film treats this like a surprise, so I'll be fair and give the heads up. The architect behind the hunt is played by Hilary Swank, and the movie goes out of its way to conceal her identity, actually shooting her from behind during her first scene, and it's only an hour in, as the movie moves into the third act, is Swank finally revealed. And it's a shame that this was spoiled in the advertising, because this being a secret cameo would have been fantastic, especially because it seizes upon her playing way against type. Swank has this very kindly on-screen presence, and you can tell that she is savouring getting to play evil, just really quietly psychopathic. She comes across as this demented Martha Stewart in a lot of ways, especially because much of her screen time is spent in a kitchen cooking food as she's explaining to Betty Gilpin what's going on. And certainly I think that Swank is probably the best thing about the movie. She's only in it for about 10 to 15 minutes, but she definitely makes the most of it. And certainly the fight sequence that ensues there is where the movie actually becomes fun, at least for a moment, as they take turns stabbing each other with various kitchen utensils. And Gilpin and Swank really throw themselves into it. I love the domestic setting that it takes place in, and it's a sequence that shows up the action in the rest of the movie, which is too often perfunctory, overly cut, and too reliant on CGI gore effects for shock. It's also a good thing that Swank is as great as she is in this film, because she also has to deliver some of the dumbest material in it. There's a key flashback that explains how the hunt came to be that is absolutely preposterous. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, and it's also a gigantic cop-out, because the movie has this political satire, but then it pushes it to the side in this moment in favour of some cancel culture commentary BS that the movie in any way manages to recover from. This complete asinine moment is a miracle. Whilst Good the Hunt did finally make it out, that by no means makes it a good movie. This is a load of cheap shots that's far too impressed with itself. There's something really quite smug and smarmy about the whole thing that just rubbed me the wrong way, especially because its satire is so skin-crawlingly cringeworthy. It manages to be both really obvious and on the nose and say nothing at the same time. And when you combine that with all the tricksiness of the plotting, it just reveals how thoroughly empty and flashy it all is once you get past all the buzz and controversy around it. It especially suffers by comparison to last year's Ready or Not, which ironically came out at roughly around the same time this movie was supposed to, and in every way that movie trounces this one. It's far more imaginative, far more clever, far more fun, and also far more incisive. Go see that movie instead. As for The Hunt, it's got to the count of 10 before I declare open season. The Hunt tries to be a politicised take on the familiar Most Dangerous Game premise, but it spends far more time caught in controversy than being well executed. This is a movie that thinks it's far cleverer than it really is, with constant twists and unexpected deaths, but ends up feeling smug and disingenuous because there's nothing for the audience to commit to. It certainly isn't the characters, most of whom are broad stereotypes who recite eye-rolling satire before being quickly dispatched, and the movie pretty much has level disdain at everyone, barring Betty Gilpin's Crystal, who has no character at all. Hilary Swank is deliciously nasty when she at last appears for a finale that reminds you what fun this could have been, but this is largely just as empty and mean-spirited as it is cynical. If you like this review, then take your pursuit over to my Patreon, where you can see my reviews early among other perks, including access to my Discord server. But until next time, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.